All right, so at the end of this lecture, we have got basically two objectives that we have to be able to accomplish. We have to be able to know what quadratic equations are. So what are quadratic equations? Maybe three objectives. So know what quadratic equations are. We have to learn how to solve quadratic equations, After learning how to solve quadratic equations, we have to talk about things known as quadratic functions. Functions is a paper one type of topic, so I'm going to teach you functions, but a quadratic equation can be expressed in form of a function that you can graph on an X or Y plane using graph paper. So the final part, which we're going to do about 4 graphs next time we do mathematics. So we have to know the quadratic function. So here we're going to encounter graphs that look like this, where there are maximum tens, they can be minimum tens, and sometimes because the syllabus has changed, they can bring something exponential like this. So I'm going to solve at least 3 or to 4 types of quadratic functions on the graph. Either they are going to tell you to draw a graph, or they are going to draw a graph, and then you have to answer specific questions based on that question. So all this is covered under the topic known as quadratic equations. You have to know you have to know what quadratic equations are. You have to know how to solve quadratic equations, and you also have to know how to graph the quadratic function. It can either be a maximum, a minimum, or an exponential graph, and there will be a series of questions that we will be required to solve, including things like area, how to find area under the curve, and also gradient, and how to relate a linear equation to the graph. What do I mean by this? You'll be taught to say, okay, in the following graph, plot the line y is equals to 2x plus 3. Then you're going to be able to maybe plot, and then they're going to say, okay, find the solution set or solve the equation 2x plus 3 is equal to the quadratic function that they've given you. Maybe it will be f of x is equal to x squared plus 3x plus 2. Or sometimes it can be f of x is equal to x plus 2, x plus 3. It's usually something within those lines. So that's what we're going to learn. Area, gradient, how to plot a straight line on the graph, and also how to solve equations. They'll be like using the graph that you've plotted, solve the equation, etc. Have you encountered such questions before?
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to do as many types of questions. So over the holiday or around next week, we usually solve math every Wednesday. So I encourage you that next time we solve math on Wednesday, you should have a graph paper. So I'm going to talk to Charity. I'm going to tell her, all right, we need graph papers by next week so that we can start practicing in real time on a graph. And I also encourage you to get a scientific calculator. I prefer Casio. Do you have a calculator?
Yes.
Is it close by?
Yes.
All right, maybe try grabbing your calculator. I'll wait for you. Okay, so let's start with our first objective now. So we have to be able to know what a quadratic equation is. And there are basically 4 types of quadratic equations that you have to know. But the trick when it comes to quadratic equations, they are always characterized by a square, a power of 2. So a quadratic equation is an equation in which one variable, so every type of quadratic equation is going to have one variable, And that one variable is going to give you two answers. So that's the characteristic of any type of quadratic equation. You're going to have one variable giving you two answers. And there are various types of quadratic equations where you have this characteristic, where you have one variable giving you two answers. And it will always be a power. So it could be x squared or y squared. This power of 2 is going to signify that this variable here, either x or this variable here or y, or it could be z squared, it could be anything. The power of 2 in any quadratic equation signifies that that variable is going to have two answers all the time. It's either x is equals to that or x is equals to that. So let's start off with the type 1 of quadratic equations. So type 1. So type 1, it's in the form of, if you see a question like this saying x squared is equal to 25, and then they say solve for x. So because here we're trying to solve for x, we're trying to make x the subject of the formula, we want to get rid of this square. So what we're going to do to always get rid of this square, we have to square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So I'm going to square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Because I'm squaring it like that, this square is going to go. So x will be equal to the square root of 5 is either 5 or negative 5. Yes, either 5 or negative 5. Remember that time when I told you for the sake of quadratic equations, a square number can either have a positive value or a negative value. Do you remember me mentioning that?
Yes.
So here, the value of x will be 5 or x is equal to negative 5. Exactly. Oh, good. So that would be your answer. So have you seen that one variable has given us two answers? So you always have to think to yourself, how can I make something the subject of the formula? Is this, what type of equation is this? If you see something like this in this format, you have to realize that, all right, so it's a type 1 of the quadratic equation, and all I have to do is square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side to get my value. And have you ever wondered why we're to square this? Why are we using this square root to get rid of this square here? I'm going to teach you properly in terms of indices. There's a question called, there's a topic called indices where we're going to encounter certain rules. We're going to encounter this rule, the square root of a multiplied by the square root of a will give you back a. So if we say the square root of 4 multiplied by the square root of 4, it will give us 4. The square root of 4 is 2, multiplied by the square root of 4, which is 2. 2 times 2 is going to give us 4. The square root of 9 multiplied by the square root of 9 is going to give us 9. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 9 is 3. It's going to give us 9. So to get rid of this square here, this square here, we have to square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side so that we liberate this x in between there. But that doesn't matter. You just have to know, right, if I have a square there and I want to get rid of this square, I'll just simply square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Are you following? So this is type 1 of quadratic equations. You followed?
Yes.
All right. So let's look at type 2 of quadratic equations, where you have to do just slightly a little bit of algebra. Then type 3, you have to do some form of factorization. Let me show you what I mean. So that was type 1, where you just square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side and get two answers. But type 2 is going to require you to sort of have, it's going to require you to have a sort of equation being formed. So this is type 2. You're going to have something in brackets, x minus 2 squared is equal to 36. So first thing you have to ask yourself that, all right, so I have to get rid of this square there. How do I do that? Remember, again, I'm mentioning this and I'll keep on mentioning it until you write your exam. To get rid of this square again, you have to square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So is equal to 36. So we are square rooting squared. We're square rooting both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. The square root is going to go, because there's a square root as a tool there. So if you cancel that and you cancel that, the square root goes. This is a simpler way of explaining it. So if something is a square there, where are we square rooting? A square root as a 2. So this 2 and that 2 comes out 2, so that you should have x there. I think this is a simpler way of explaining it. If it was x cubed, you have to cube both the left-hand side and right-hand side to get rid of the x, so that the x should remain alone. If it was x to the power 4, you cube root both sides, so that cancels, x should remain alone. All right, I think that's a better way of explaining it as to why we are square rooting both sides. Why we're square rooting both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. All right, so once we square root this side, we're going to have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 6. So you've seen that here we are programming each other towards the quadratic formula. So this part here, let me even highlight it. I like to highlight in green. This part here is extremely important because it's telling us that the square root of 36 is either positive 6 or negative 6. Because that's what we've done this side, right? We've said, what's the square root of 36? It's either positive 6 or negative 6, right? Excellent.
Yes.
Meaning this equation here can be split into 2. It can be split into 2. It's either x minus 2 is equal to positive 6, the positive square root, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 6, the negative square root of 36. So you formed 2 equations there. So how do I form this? How do I solve this equation? This digit here, we're collecting like terms. So this negative 2 is going to cross over to the other side to do the same. This negative 2 is going to cross over to the other side. So on this one hand, it will be x is 6 plus 2, or x is negative 6 plus 2. So at least here, this one is easy. So x is equal to 8, 6, 7, 8. That would be our answer. But on the other hand here, x is equal to, so which number is bigger between 6 and 2?
6.
Meaning our answer will be a negative, right?
Oh, yes.
Then we're now saying what's negative times positive?
It's negative.
Excellent, negative, meaning we're subtracting. So we're just saying 6 minus 2, which would be 4. So either x is equal to positive 8 or x is equal to negative 4. So that's how you solve the type 2 of quadratic equations. You are going to come up with 2 equations and then you solve them independently. Making sure this is a very important point because it's what's going to split the equation into 2. Even when we're manipulating quadratic equations using the formula method, we're going to encounter a part where the whole quadratic equation splits into 2 equations to solve for a square root of x, to solve for a negative square root and the positive, to solve for the negative value and the positive value of the square root. So how did we solve it? We first identified that, all right, it's x minus 2 squared is equal to 36. So we asked ourselves, all right, I have to get rid of this square. So the thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to square root both the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So square root in here got rid of this square there, because the square root has a 2 there that you can see. So it got rid of this square, we remained with x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 6. This plus or minus 6, now you know what it means. It means 36 can either have a positive square root. So 36, the square root of 36 can either be positive 6 or negative 6. That's what this part means. This part allowed us to split the equation into two individual equations. It became x minus 2 is equal to positive 6, or x minus 2 is equal to negative 6. Then from here, we just make x the subject of the formula, or we solve for x. So we collect like terms, the negative 2 crossed over to the other side to join the other integer, which is 6. It became 6 plus 2, which is 8. Then even on the other equation, the negative 2 crossed the equal sign to become positive 2. Then it became negative 6 plus 2, giving us an answer of negative 4. So again, it's a quadratic equation because one variable has given us two answers. So that's what it means by a quadratic equation. So let's look at the type 3 of the quadratic equation, which will require you to just factorize a little bit. Once you factorize a little bit, then everything is going to become easy to solve. So type 3. Today's lesson plan is nice because I've solved everything for you. So immediately I send the notes. You're going to have a detailed explanation of everything, including this lecture video. So let's, the one for type 3 requires you to factorize. So let's look at how type 3 looks like. X squared minus 6x is equal to 0. So they're saying you, all right, okay, solve this type of equation. And you're like, how can I make x the subject of the formula here? First of all, there's a square there, but there is no equal sign. So I cannot square root both the left-hand side and right-hand side. I can't do that because you can only square root both the left-hand side or the right-hand side in type 1 and type 2. Type 1 was like that. Though this square was separated by an equal sign, so we're able to square root both sides, including type 2. There was an equal sign there. However, here there's a minus sign here. There's a minus sign, so we cannot square root both the left-hand side and right-hand side. So to make sure that there's an equal sign between the left-hand side and the right-hand side, hold on, let me just pause the recording and take this in. So you've noticed that for type 1 and type 2 types of quadratic equations, we were able to remove this square by square rooting both the left-hand side and right-hand side. But for this one, type 3, there's no equal sign here. There's this minus sign there. So what we have to do here is we first have to factorize so that we can have an equal sign connecting two types of equation, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side, so that we can either cross multiply or divide to make x the subject of the formula. So how do we factorize here? We either look for a common factor and or variable, right?
Yes.
So what do these two have in common? There's a variable in common, which is x, right?
Yes.
So there's an x there, there's an x there. So what we're going to do is get this same x and divide the entire equation by x. So I'm going to divide this by x. There are two x's here. So one of the x's will remain with one x. That x will cancel, will remain with minus 6 is equal to 0. So at this point here, we're going to do something called double factorization. You don't have to know that it's double factorization, but you are going to see what I mean. So we're going to split this part using this equal sign here. So we're going to say it's either x is equal to 0 or x minus 6 is equal to 0. So we're going to say it's either x is equal to 0 or x minus 6 is equal to 0. So the initial equation is like this. After factorization, we were left with x, open brackets, x minus 6 is equal to 0. So here we're using double factorization. We're either saying it's either x is equal to 0 or x minus 6 is equal to 0. So you split this in two. So this is one answer, x is equal to 0, but we also have to solve this one. How do we solve this one? The 6 just crosses the equal sign to where the 0 is. X is equal to 6. So it's either x is equal to 0 or x is equal to 6. So this is type 3. You first factorize. After you factorize, you use the double factor method. I think it's called double factor method, where it's either x is equal to 0 or x minus 6 is equal to 0. So that's type 3 of the quadratic equation. Are you okay at this point? You'll be able to revise and study.
Yes.
All right. Math is easy. You just have to know how to solve. You don't have to even stress yourself out. You just have to say, all right, me, paper one, I'm going to try my best. I'll answer as many questions as possible that I know. And then paper two, I'm going to choose. I'm going to answer section A properly. And then section B, I'm going to make sure at least I know quadratic function properly so that when it comes, I'm going to draw that graph, or I'm going to answer questions on that graph properly. Maybe I'm going to also solve trigonometry. If they bring statistics, I'm going to know how to find standard deviation and mean properly and draw that cumulative frequency graph. You just have to know four topics for paper two. Once you know those four topics, you practice them continuously, you'll be able to go into that exam and answer the questions. Do you still choose in paper two?
Yes.
You can just find things have changed. You know, I was last in grade 12 in 2013. So I'm odd, slightly odd. Okay, so let's now go to the general type. So type 4, look at how I'm writing type 4. So type 4 is the general type. The general type. So what do we mean by the general type? It's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So now I want you to know something here. This a here and this b here are coefficients. This is a coefficient there and it's a coefficient there. And then this one is your constant variable without the coefficients. And these coefficients can be, they are integers. And remember what I said about integers, they are just numbers on a number line going from 0, -1, -2, infinity, or 0, +1, +2, etc. infinity. So this can be, a can be any integer. A can be -1, -2, -3. It could be anything. A and B can be any type of integer. And why are we calling them coefficients? Because they are numbers that are appearing in front of the variable. So here the x squared is a variable. And this x here is also a variable. So a quadratic equation can be in any form. It can even be ay squared plus by plus c. It will always be in reducing powers of 2. So you're going to notice that the first variable here, let me use x so that you don't get confused, but it can be x, it can be y, it can be anything. Just notice the variable, the coefficients will always be the same. The first coefficient on x squared is a. The second coefficient on the x is b. And the coefficient and the constant term without any variable. It's called a constant term because there's no variable there. And this power, any quadratic equation is in the order of decreasing powers of x, or if it's in the form of y, it will be decreasing powers of y. What do I mean here? It's going from x squared to x to the power of 1 to x to the power of 0. In the future, we're going to know that any number to the power of 0 is 1. No wonder this one has no coefficient. So you've seen here the first digit is going to have a power of 2. The second digit there is going to have a power of 2, or a power of 1, sorry. So first digit, a power of 2. Second digit, a power of 1. And this constant term, it's going to have a power of 0. But any number to the power of 0 is 1. So we're not going to write this x to the power of 0. It's practically 1. So no wonder it's called the constant term. It has no coefficient whatsoever. So it's a constant term. So that's how a quadratic equation should always be arranged in this manner, because the examiner might, let me give you an example. Let's say 3x squared minus 4x plus 6 is equal to 0. They say solve this quadratic equation. These are the coefficients, and this is the constant term. So this is the coefficient on x squared is a, the coefficient on x is b, and this is the constant term. But what the examiner can do, so remember it has to go from, it has to be in this order. Decreasing powers of x. This is the order. It has to go from x to the power of 2, x to the power of 1, x to the power of 0. What the examiner might do is they will say they solve the following quadratic equation. They will say plus 6 plus 3x squared minus 4x is equal to 0. Without this plus 6 there, okay. So they're going to say solve this quadratic equation there. If you see this quadratic equation, it's not in order. The examiner is going to mess up the quadratic equation so that the student should fail to use the quadratic formula, which we're going to discuss shortly. But you as a student, you know that, all right, a quadratic equation has to be in the form of reducing powers of x. So the first one has to have an x squared there. So you get this one, okay, we're going to first arrange this one x squared. Then the next one has to have a power of 1. So you're going to get this one, okay, minus 4x. Then we have to have a constant term there. So you're going to get this 6 and say plus 6 is equal to 0. Then now you can start solving. So that's the general form. And there are 3 ways in which you can solve a quadratic equation, a general type of quadratic equation, but I'm just going to teach you one because it's the one that comes in the exam. They're going to tell you solve the quadratic equation, leaving your answers to 3 significant figures or maybe 2 decimal places. If a question comes like that, they are telling you to use the quadratic formula. So the examiner, they know. So these are the 3 methods in which you can solve a quadratic equation in this form. You can solve it using the factor method. You can solve it using the completing the square. Completing the square. And you can also solve it using the formula method. The formula method comes from the completing the square method, and this one is the one that's examined. They are going to say solve the following quadratic equation, leaving your answer to 2 decimal places or 3 significant figures. When we go back to the paper 1 type of questions, we are going to look at standard form and significant figures. So you are going to gain a clearer understanding of what I mean here. So here, this is what's examined. If you want to know something, you have to know this. And every year, a quadratic equation in paper 2 carries 5 marks. Just by using the formula, you get 5 marks. You cannot risk losing these marks. 5 marks is huge, very huge. Much worse, the quadratic function where you do your whole graphing, etc. I think it carries, is it 12 marks? 12 marks or 24. How many marks do questions carry in paper 2? Those for choosing. Is it 24 or 12 marks?
Oh,
12 marks, huh? Yeah, it carries 12 marks. So it's very, very critical. Just by plotting and drawing a graph, you get 12 marks. So this topic, it will be your savior topic. I'm repeating, this topic is your savior topic. So you really have to know how to solve quadratic equations. Just give me a minute. Okay, so completing the square method, the formula method carries a lot, 5 marks. So as you are writing the notes properly, you should also buy some highlighters so that you can be highlighting while you're studying. So you have to know this formula. X is equal to minus b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac. Please do not say over 2a. This is wrong. Like writing it like that. If I see you writing it like that, I'll be very upset. It's the whole thing, the entire thing, from the start of the equal sign here. The whole line has to be over 2a. Is that okay?
yes.
And now you know what B, what A, what C are. They come from their coefficients, and these coefficients can be integers. Ax squared plus bx plus c, these are the coefficients. A coefficient is a number that appears in front of a variable, and they are usually integers. So it can either be a negative number or a positive number. So these are coefficients. And the c is the constant term. It has no it has no variable. There's no x there, there's no y there. It's just a standalone number. And just remember, again, arrangement of a quadratic equation is in decreasing powers of 2. So it will go from x squared to x to the power 1 to x to the power of 0. So you have to be able to rearrange the quadratic equation. All right, so now let's try solving an equation. Let's try solving a quadratic equation. I brought a very interesting one so that you can learn how to use the quadratic formula. So I encourage you to solve this question a maximum of 5 times. So the first time that you're going to solve this question is when you write it in your book. So you write it in your book, that's the first time. Then you get a rough book or a plain paper and you solve it another 4 times. So you just practice it. You write it down, you write down the formula, you write down the coefficients. Please, again, I'm telling you, solve this question 5 times. You can't lose 5 marks. So because this question carries 5 marks, I'm telling you to solve it 5 times. I'm going to solve it once, and I'm going to end this lecture video. The next time we're going to start with this part here, the quadratic function, and we're going to solve one graph when you have a graph paper. But what I want you to do at the end of this lecture, you have to do this work. I'll send you the video and the notes, and you have to solve this 5 times. Are you going to solve this 5 times?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. I'll trust you because, we are adults. We know what we want in our future. I want in the future to hear that, all right, you are out there, you are working, you are getting a good salary, you are, supporting yourself, you're in a good house and environment, even helping others. So we've got this type of quadratic equation. It's saying solve using the formula minus 13x plus 21 plus 2x squared is equal to 0. So here we see that there is something wrong with this quadratic equation. It's not in order. So the first thing that you have to do is that you have to put it in order in terms of decreasing powers of x. So we have to go from x to the power 2 to x to the power 1 to x to the power 0. So the first thing that we have to start with is this positive 2, right? So I'm going to say
Yes.
2x squared. Then the next one will be this one here, minus x. So, or minus 13x
Plus.
plus 21, which is the constant term, is equal to 0. So nothing has crossed the equal sign, nothing has done anything. All we've done is rearrange. Positive 2x squared is still positive 2x squared. Negative 13x is still negative 13x. And positive 21 is still positive 21. So we've rearranged this equation. We haven't done anything. We've just rearranged it in the proper state. So the second thing that we do is we state the quadratic formula. We say x, actually before stating the quadratic formula, we start to assign coefficients. So I'm going to say, all right, the coefficient on A here, A is the coefficient on x squared. So here x squared, what's the coefficient there? A is the coefficient on x squared, and this is x squared. The coefficient there, coefficient is 2. So A is equal to 2. Why am I saying A is equal to 2? Because A is the coefficient on x squared. So this is the coefficient on x squared. So A is equal to 2. What about the coefficient on x there? This coefficient there, the b. The coefficient on x is negative 13. Remember, I told you coefficients are integers, so don't always be expecting positive values. They are integers. So b is negative 13. Then the c, which is the constant term, c is
21.
1. Yes.
21.
So now that you know what A is, the coefficient on x squared, which is 2, now that you know what B is, which is the coefficient on x, which is negative 13, and the constant term, which is 21, you can now state the formula so that you substitute. You're going to tell them x is equal to minus b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole thing over 2a, right?
Yes.
Then now we substitute. So every time you substitute, it's better you use brackets so that you don't make mistakes. So where there's b there, we'll plug in negative 13. Where there's a, we'll plug in 2. Where there's a c, we'll plug in 21. Using brackets, please use brackets. Why am I saying use brackets? Because someone can just say, all right, x is equal to minus 13. And they're going to say, all right, where there's b, I've plugged in 13. And you get it wrong here. Instead, you have to do this. because the minus is part of the equation. So you say x is equal to minus, open brackets, the value of b, which is negative 13, close brackets. So this minus here is part of the equation. So x is equal to minus, open brackets, the value of b, close brackets. The value of b is minus 13, plus or minus root of, open brackets. Hold on. Let me just pause the recording. Okay. So again, I told you you have to use brackets. So where there's b there, we put minus 13. Where there is b again, we have to put minus 13, close brackets, square, because there's a square there on b. It says b squared. So the value of b, squaring it. So open brackets, minus 13, close brackets, squared. These brackets are going to help prevent you from making integer mistakes, because the integers in this formula are a lot. There's a minus b there, there's a minus sign there. So again, you say minus 4, open brackets, a is 2, close brackets, c is 21, close brackets, the whole thing over 2, open brackets, a is 2, close brackets. So now you start expanding. So you say x will be equal to negative times negative, it's positive. So that's how you expand there. So it will be 13 plus or minus root of, so on your calculator, what's 13, negative 13 times negative 13? Negative
169.
169, all right. Then say negative 4 times positive 2 times positive 21 to be negative something.
Negative 29.
Negative 4 times 2 times 21. So it's just like saying 4 times 2 times 21. Should be minus 168.
168.
Right? Okay. So the whole thing over 2 times 2, which is 4. So that would be x is equal to 13 plus or minus the square root of 1, right?
Yes.
Over 4. So now that we've gotten here, this part here, let me highlight it again. This plus or minus here, it's telling us that this square root here can either have a positive value or a negative value, just like the type 2 type of quadratic equations. So they're telling us that this square root here can either have a positive value or a negative value. So this is going to split into 2 types of equations. It will split into 2. It will either be x is equal to 13 plus, we're getting now the positive square root, so the square root of 1 is 1. So it can either be 1 or negative 1, so 1 over 4, or x is equal to 13 minus 1 over 4. So you've seen that here they are telling us that the square root of 1 can either be positive 1 or negative 1. So the equation has split into 2. Let me split it here. So that we can work downwards and not sideways. I don't like working sideways. So this part that I have highlighted in green is telling us that the square root of 1 can either be a positive and a negative value. So this entire equation is going to split into 2 equations. if you want, you can show the examiner these arrows. I prefer you show the examiner these arrows to tell them that you understand this part here. The square root, whatever value you are going to find after subtracting, will be a square root of a number. And the square root of that number is going to have a positive value or a negative value. So this entire equation splits into x is equal to 13 plus 1 over 4, or x is equal to 13 minus 1 over 4. So it's the square root of 1, can either be positive 1 or negative 1. So here, evaluating this, it will be 14 over 4 or 12, right? 12
13.
over 4, right? Yeah, so use your
Yes.
calculator. What's this? Evaluate this fraction, 14 divided by 4.
3.5.
All right, 3.5. And then this one, x is equal to 3, right? 4, 8, 12, 3. So again, one variable has given us two answers. So this is how you solve your quadratic equation. They are going to say, all right, this person knows the formula, so you get 1 mark. All right, has this person substituted properly? All right, you get another mark, 1. Okay, has this person evaluated properly there? Okay, you get another 1 mark. Okay, has this person split the equation properly? You get another mark. All right, has this person stated the answer properly? You get 0.5 for one answer, 0.5 for one answer. In total, you get 1 mark. So adding them all, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marks in total. No wonder this question is worth 5 marks. So don't be surprised, please, if it comes as they remove the x, they say 2y squared minus 13y plus 21. It's still a quadratic equation. But instead of saying x, you're going to say y is equal to minus b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. The coefficients will still the same, will still be the same. A will still be 2, b will still be negative 13, and c, the constant, will still be 21. So these coefficients in the equation will always be the same, but they can change the variable there. It can be x, it can be y, or it can even be z. They might say z, they might say 2z squared minus 13z plus 21, meaning you're now going to say z is equal to minus b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole thing over 2a. A is still going to be 2, b is still going to be negative 13, and the constant term will still be 21. The only variable that you're going to be finding will be like, okay, z is equal to 3.5 or z is equal to 3. If it was in the form of y, you would be saying y is equal to 3.5 or y is equal to 3. But here it was in the form of x. So we started our equation saying because the unknown here was x, 2x squared minus 13x plus 21. So our quadratic equation, we said x is equal to minus b plus or minus root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole thing over 2a. So that's part 1 of quadratic equations. I'll send you the lecture notes and the video. You have to write this whole thing in your math tuition book. I'll see you tomorrow. I can end the meeting.
Yes.
All right, see you tomorrow.